Tonight, I will be telling 8 stories. The first 6 will be dealing with a fan favorite, deep wood stories. The last 2 will be equally entertaining but of a different topic. I must say, I've told easily 1,000 stories on this channel, and some of these still manage to get me. There's something about being alone in the wilderness that is just wrong, especially under the circumstances explained tonight. A huge thank you to the writers for allowing me to share their stories. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. Likes and comments are always appreciated if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. For the longest time, there had always been what the locals called an animal problem in McLean Creek. Often, and all year round, campers and motocross enthusiasts alike would run into carcasses that had been torn to pieces and left to rot. First, it was carcasses of deer and rabbits. Then it was carcasses of stray cows from a nearby farm, and then eventually, corpses of people. Conservation, believing the carnivores in the area, wolves and cougars mostly, were to blame, conducted a search and destroy type mission. When they discovered a shredded to the bone corpse of a grizzly bear, they were dumbfounded. The campground was closed indefinitely until the culprit was found and taken care of. However, they left the motocross park open. Naturally, motocross vehicles would be able to outspeed any of the predators, so attendance from spring to fall was high. That's when my older brother, Trevor, and I decided it would be good to rip around in the motocross park after a few rough days of our lives. This day would not only be rough, but terrifying. Recently dumped by his perfect girlfriend, my brother was in the dumps. I was struggling with my new job and had a slew of failed dates myself. We wanted today to be about reminding ourselves of our freedoms, especially from the opposite sex, and we did so by going out on the ATVs. It was about 12 p.m. when we arrived and unloaded our trailer that carried our precious vehicles. It was the tail end of summer, making the perfect warm temperature. Sunlight peeked through the heavily clouded sky, shining a ray of light, as if to tell us we made the right decision to come here. Trevor, not planning on going in foolishly unprotected, brought his rifle with him. We felt safe enough with the one. He strapped it to his back, and we took off on our ATVs. Plenty of people come to the creek for target practice, since guns are allowed in certain areas of the creek outside of the campground. Strangely enough, we couldn't find a single soul in the creek as we rode along the trails. Normally, this is something I've got no objection to, but this time there was a certain unease and looming dread in the air. It was as if someone who was here had suddenly vanished. There were plenty of fresh trails made by other riders, but we couldn't see nor hear any of them. Trevor had the same feeling, but assured we'd be fine because of our fast vehicles with full tanks and his rifle. About 45 minutes into the ride, we stopped for a break. We reminisced and vented about our girl issues, and fired off a few rounds with the rifle. Our fun was interrupted by a strange combination of sounds. Firstly, a sound that sounded like a howl mixed with a long, guttural groan echoed through the trees. It was followed by a couple of revving engines. After the sounds of the revving engines came the sounds of several people screaming. Then silence. Nothing but the ominous breeze that carried a rotten smell, strong and repulsive, which made Trevor dry heave a little. I immediately felt the urge to leave, and Trevor took little convincing to get him going. We heard that strange howl once more, a little louder this time as we drove away. As we sped through a narrow trail surrounded by thin aspen trees, I noticed something large running parallel in the trees about the same speed as I was going. It looked black, and it ran on all fours. I thought it must have been a black bear, as it matched the size of one. It was about 50 meters away, and it seemed to follow beside us for a good few minutes before charging deeper into the woods. I waved for my bro to pull over, which we did, and I explained what I saw to him. He readied the gun, keeping it tucked to his front instead of slung over his back. A couple minutes later, Trevor slammed on the brakes, and being right behind him, we nearly collided. I saw him aim down the sights. He was shaky, and once my eyes moved 20 meters up the trail, I understood why. Laying there in the middle of a fork in the trail was a dead grizzly bear. This thing was massive, and it was being eaten. The thing that was eating it was no ordinary animal. It was black, like the thing I saw running in the trees, Its body was like that of a large wolf, but with longer and more humanoid-shaped limbs. Its fur was matted and thick with mud. Its strange, elongated face devoured chunks of meat off the bear. What was left was merely bone. My nose started to pick up that horrible smell from before. It was definitely coming from this thing. It was more potent now, even making me queasy through my helmet. It didn't seem to notice us at first, as it continued to feast on the bear. Trevor was frozen, as was I for what felt like an eternity of seeing it. I looked behind me and noticed that there was a trail that took the high road a short distance away. I urged my brother to put the ATV in reverse, and after some hesitation, he complied. One of our ATVs kicked a rock right at the creature as we sped in reverse towards the trail. That's when it noticed us. It stood up on its hind legs and was easily 8 feet tall. It let out a scream that trailed off with the groaning sound I had heard before. This was it. This was the creature that lurked in our county, that had everyone scared for their lives. It lumbered over the corpse of the bear and then dropped back on all fours and charged. Luckily, we were far enough back to redirect ourselves onto the high road trail and wasted no time driving upwards as this thing chased us. Trevor warned me to cover my ears before firing the gun from the hip. I heard the bullet hit it and saw clumps of filthy hair fly off the creature's shoulder. It slowed down to inspect itself, and we managed to gain a significant distance. Then we heard the scream and groan again. Not even 30 seconds of being on the trail alone, I saw trees shaking and dust being kicked up in the distance. It was navigating through the tree line surprisingly well for such a large beast. I urged Trevor that it was coming back, to which he pulled a horrible stunt, letting go of the handlebars to turn around and aim. I weaved to the side as he took the shot. Just as the creature broke through the tree line and onto the trail, he fired it. It was a direct hit in the chest. The creature hissed and kept running at us. It was after Trevor. It was on all fours gaining speed. Trevor sped up even faster as the trail smoothed out, lowering the risk of him getting hurt. The creature roared, its gruesome dog face almost at his rear tires. I thought this thing was going to destroy his ATV and then proceed to devour my brother. I was terrified, but what could I do? I could only focus on the trail and this thing through my tear-stained helmet. Then Trevor fired. This time, the bullet went right into its mouth. The creature trembled forward, and we gained a solid amount of distance. I took a look back as the trail bent, and saw it slowly get up and limp into the trees. I sighed a breath of relief. After a tense ride back, we finally made it to the truck and trailer. We heard the noise it made in the far distance, echoing through the creek. I hoped others would hear it and make their escape before it was too late. We wasted no time getting the ATVs hitched, and we got out of there in record speed. We would have easily been pulled over by cops for speeding, but thankfully, the rural area rarely has to worry about police officers shaking people down. It's been a few weeks since the incident. Things are looking decent in our lives since that close encounter. Reports of strange animal noises have been making the rounds in the rural town's newspapers and broadcasts. There's even talk of closing off the off-road park and selling the land, though those are just rumors. Another rumor I've been hearing is that the conservation is going to make another attempt at wiping this creature. I hope my brother and I aren't the only living witnesses of this thing. A strange creature is definitely hunting around our county, and if anyone's going to be taking it down, they're going to need some serious firepower. To give some background, I used to live in a city on the northeast coast that had a couple hundred acres of woods scattered around. I used to walk through them constantly with friends just to kill time. Whether it was day or night, we would walk miles throughout. Well, one night around in mid-December, it was snowing, but just enough to where the ground was covered a bit and we could still walk fine. Normally in these woods, you can't see anything past dusk, but since there was snow, the moonlight was reflecting off and creating a little bit of a shimmer. It was also an extraordinarily quiet type of night. My friend and I started walking through the woods at about 11 p.m. on a trail we frequently go on. The trail is roughly 2 to 3 miles long and runs alongside a creek. We get about 3/4 of a mile into the trail and we're just bullshitting around and laughing. All of a sudden, the second we both stop talking for a second, an inhuman moan starts up. It almost sounds like an animal taking its last breath, but too low pitched to be that. It goes on for what seemed like minutes. We just keep looking around for what could be making the moan, but couldn't pinpoint where it was. Then it stopped. We looked at each other and shrugged our shoulders, then proceed down the trail. About another quarter-mile down the path, my friend looks to his left and sees a trail of blood in the snow that leads down towards the creek. He taps my shoulder and points out the blood to me. Me, being the idiot that I am, then says, "Let's see what it could be." My friend agrees and we start following it. The blood trail was about 150 feet or so long, and went all the way down to about 5 feet from the creek. At the end was a pool of blood. An insane amount of blood too, like more than any animal or human could possibly produce. There was so much. The scent in the air was making us gag. That's not the only weird thing. We also noticed there were no footprints in the snow anywhere near the blood besides ours. About 30 seconds after we get to the pool of blood, the moaning started up again. This time though, it was near deafening and sounded like it came from every direction. We both became dazed and confused from just how loud the moaning was, and the stench of the blood. My friend looked up, locked eyes with me, and we both nodded. We started running back up towards the main trail and ran the whole way out of the woods. We watched the news for the next few days to see if anything was found or mentioned about that area, but nothing ever came of it. To this day, I can't describe how the moaning sounded like nothing I've ever heard before, or how bad and strong that smell of blood was. If anybody has any ideas on what it could have been, please let me know. That night still haunts me. I went camping this last weekend by myself, and I had never been so afraid in my life. It was a trip I planned as a symbol to rediscover my newfound freedom after my boyfriend of 2 years broke up with me. I've gone camping with friends, boyfriends, and family tons of times before, but never alone, and I never will again. The events that I'm about to share with you happened last weekend. I'm still in shock, but I finally feel like I can share my experience. It started like any other beautiful fall morning as I packed my equipment into my truck. I had my coffee and I was ready to take on the weekend. I was really looking forward to it. Now I feel like I can't leave my house without having a panic attack. Once I arrived at the campgrounds, which I had been to once before with friends a few years back, I decided to take a hike before unpacking. I headed over to a nearby creek that led to an amazing view over a cliff. As soon as I began to walk deeper into the woods, I immediately felt like I was being watched. It's a strange feeling to have, especially in a place that is supposed to be fairly isolated. I was worried that it might be a wild cat nearby stalking me. But I decided to continue on and make some noise to hopefully scare it away. Once I reached the cliff, I immediately felt better. Seeing what seemed like the entire world below me as I stood on top of the cliff felt incredible. Finally, after about an hour, I got back to camp to set everything up, except when I approached my truck, I noticed that I had a flat tire. I was upset, but not discouraged. I, of course, had a spare, and I planned on changing the tire once I finished setting up camp. I honestly didn't feel rushed to change it, since I didn't plan on driving anywhere for another 2 days anyway. Everything seemed to move very quickly after that. Once I set up my tent and gathered enough wood for a fire, I heard a loud thump coming from the direction where I had walked earlier to the creek. I had no idea what could have made that noise. It sounded very heavy and very close. It scared me, but I still managed to remain calm. The feeling of control slowly diminished as my truck spontaneously turned on. I quickly got up and ran to the driver's side to see who was in there, but the seat was empty. In fact, as I stood there, I remembered that the keys were currently in my front pocket. I was staring at the nothing that turned on my truck. How do I turn it off? I decided to try and stick the keys into the ignition anyway, and see if I could somehow shut it off. I tried to turn the key, but the ignition was jammed. I jumped in the truck and tried to put it in drive, but again, the stick was jammed as well. At this point, I was starting to feel completely terrified and hopeless. But before I lost control, the truck suddenly turned off. I tried to turn the key again, but it was completely dead. Not even the lights turned on. I had no idea what to do. It was around 2 p.m. and everything seemed quiet. I decided I'd wait until the morning to make my way to the closest town. That is until I heard a growl coming from the same area as I heard the thump earlier. It sounded like a person imitating an animal. I figured it must have been an animal, despite the odd growling, until I heard it murmur my name. That was the last straw. Even though I knew it could get dark before I made it to civilization, my real goal was to get close enough that I would be able to get reception and call for help. I gathered what I could in my state of panic and made my way down the path. It's not the most traveled road. In fact, unless you have a truck or jeep, it would be incredibly difficult to make your way through. It was overgrown, and only people that really knew these woods would even know it existed. I had been walking as fast as I could for about an hour when I heard someone call out my name again behind me. It sounded like an old woman's voice. I stood still for a moment, completely paralyzed. I decided to not turn around, and I made a run for it. The road was bumpy and difficult to run on, but my adrenaline was pumping through me, and I could barely think straight. I was completely out of breath, and I was beginning to feel lightheaded, but I was so scared that I refused to stop. The notion of me completely collapsing was very possible, but I couldn't stop. I hadn't noticed that the clouds had gathered above me until I felt the first raindrops hit my face. Along with the rain, my tears began to run down my cheeks. I began sliding down the trail as the mud thickened, and I knew it was dangerous to continue going as fast as I was. But I couldn't bear the thought of slowing down, even though there was the fear of an injury I knew I couldn't afford. I still heard someone or something behind me. Every once in a while, it decided to say my name, each time in a different voice. I refused to turn around. I don't think I would have been able to keep the little composure I had left to keep running if I had actually turned around. Eventually, I heard my phone receive a message. I knew immediately that I was close enough to a tower and that I had reception again. I didn't stop moving as I reached in my bag to find my phone. As I entered my password, the thing behind me decided to scream. I dropped my phone and fell to my knees. I can't explain just how deafening the scream sounded. It was like nothing I had ever heard before. As soon as it stopped, I opened my eyes and searched for my phone. I was relieved when I saw it next to me. I decided to just focus on making a call. I sat there while I waited for my phone to make a connection. It was the longest seconds of my life, and I could feel the creature approach me from behind. I decided to close my eyes at this point and pray to hear a voice on the other end. I don't know if you've ever experienced complete and utter terror, but up to that point, I didn't think that such a state of mind existed. My head was spinning and my body was numb. I barely remember what I said to the dispatcher, but it must have been sufficient because after a while, I heard a jeep approach down the path. I ran as fast as I could towards it and was immediately subdued by a very confused ranger. He led me to his vehicle and we drove back into town. I eventually went home after giving my statement. I refused to go back to the campsite, even though I would be escorted by law enforcement. It was too much. I told them that I'd get a towing company to pick up my truck, and that they could keep everything else. There wasn't a damn thing I wanted back. Not much of a point anyway. I don't plan on going camping ever again. I often wondered what lay at the edges of the woods, what lies beyond our township. Our community is made up of about 100 people, all of various ages and ethnicities. I could list every man, woman, and child along with their ages, but that isn't really necessary. Just take my word when I tell you that we all know each other, and we all take care of each other. We have our own rules, and a council made up of the community elders. The elders are all that is left of the first community, and I already know what you're thinking. This sounds like the ingredients of a cult. To be honest, it is. We're not depraved of technology or given to some old guy we call father. No, nothing like that at all. We go out to the surrounding towns and cities, and yes, we've flown on airplanes and go to concerts like normal people. We even have internet in every house, and cell phone plans like the rest of you. But what makes us different is that we, the community, live at the front of a huge expanse of woods that ends at the base of a rather large mountain range that warps around the entirety of the woods and comes back to form a C shape. With our community at the opening, we are allowed to walk near the trees, close enough to touch them if we want to, but never step into the woods. Our rules are very simple. First, as I just said, we are not to set 1 foot into the woods. Second, only community members are allowed to stay in the township. For anonymity, I'll just call our home the settlement. Third, every member of the settlement is to be well educated in public schools, and to socialize with the surrounding towns and cities. Fourth, nobody is allowed to intake any non-prescription drugs or alcohol. This rule is just to make sure nobody falls victim to addiction of any kind. And I must say, after seeing people of all ages outside of the community so reliant on those things just to survive, I'm extremely glad that the elders in their wisdom added this rule. Fifth, also abide by all laws outside of the community. And the sixth and final rule, do not talk to the devil. That last one might have caught you off guard. It's something we are raised hearing, so it doesn't sound odd to me. We don't generally discuss these rules with people not of the community for fear of ridicule, and a barrage of questions that most of us can't answer. The elders and some of the older married members hold a town hall every Sunday evening beginning at dusk. We eat together and talk about events outside of the community until the sun fully sets. Then the elders talk to us about our purpose here, which is to guard the woods. Nothing goes in and nothing comes out. The settlement is the gatekeep to the woods. See, what's interesting about our cult, if you will, is that nobody is here against their will. We have no gates, no locks, no walls, no surveillance cameras, or anything of the sort, and still, not one person has abandoned the community for the outside world. We stay because we choose to, because we are all taught from birth that our mission is of the utmost importance. You see, somewhere in these woods lies what the elders believe to be the devil. I'm not sure if they mean literally Lucifer, or some ancient evil deity, as they only refer to it as the devil. It comes and goes within the woods, taking the form of various woodland creatures to watch us, then changing into the shape of a man or woman to attempt to lure us into the woods. As far as I know, it has never attempted to leave the woods. Some have fallen for the devil's deceit. I saw it once, when I was young. I saw a girl of about 15 or so lured into the woods by the shape of her mother. I saw them both, the devil in the woods disguised as her mother, and the girl who had stood only a dozen yards from me. She saw her mother beckoning to her, telling her that it was alright, and that we had all been wrong to stay out of the woods. The girl walked so casually and confidently towards the woods, that nobody around thought anything of it, as we often walk near the woods to look into it, and observe what we guard. Only, she never stopped walking. Ever. The only thing I remember is that almost everyone in the community rushed to the edge of the woods and called out to her to come back, but she never even looked back, and when she finally walked so far that the trees blocked her from view, we never saw her again. Her mother disappeared that night as well. We think she went into the woods searching for her daughter. Since that day, I've often wondered what lay at the edge of the woods. What was past the furthest point we could see? If the devil truly lived inside these woods, why didn't we just burn it down? Or better yet, how could the devil live here when the world is as messed up as it is out there? We all ask questions like this, and still we stay, even without answers. The community has a strict code about bringing in outsiders to join us, because those not used to our ways have so many questions, and they are always the most curious. So, whenever we meet someone from outside of the community, we are not allowed to bring them here, until we've known them for 1 year. Then, once they are allowed here, it is for day visits only, and the settlement has to be alerted well in advance, so that the proper defenses can be set up. We allow the guests full freedom to explore as much or little of the community as they please. But wherever they go, a group of us walks the tree line near them, just in case. Now that you know what we do, I have to tell you that I don't know what to do. You see, I have broken the rules for the community. I've been in the woods, and yes, I have spoken to the devil. I was in my house with my wife Jenna asleep in the bed next to me, only I couldn't sleep. I lay there tossing and turning, careful not to wake her, but no matter what I did, sleep eluded me. I decided to go on a nighttime stroll through the community, something I would do often as I like to walk around and admire the community. We did have guard towers spread throughout the community, but only at the tree line, and only for our own protection. We alternated guard duty between both men and women, and it made everyone feel safe. The guards didn't have weapons or anything like that. They were there simply to make sure nobody went into the woods, and nothing came out of it. The settlement was large. We had enough houses for everyone, even spare houses, our own shops and farms, and even a community room with billiard tables, dartboards, and a kitchen, garages for the vehicles and barns for the animals. If anyone had accidentally stumbled upon us, they would probably think we were our own town, and in a way, we were. Save for the fact that we didn't have a gas station, or any real use for money. Those that worked regular jobs donated their money directly to the town. We all have the exact same houses, with the exact same appliances, and the same groceries delivered every week. Nobody is above another, and nobody wants for anything. Of course, we have some people that can't or won't work jobs outside the community, and they elect to work within the community. So, the point I'm making is that I had plenty of places to walk, but for some reason, I walked particularly close to the woods that night. I wore a hoodie and some sweatpants, and just started walking. sometimes walking so close to the guard towers that I was sure they would spot me and call out, if not to ask what I was doing, at least to say hello. But nobody said a word, and I felt no eyes on me. Eventually I came to the only spot in the settlement that I knew couldn't be seen from any tower. It was a place that 2 of the newer buildings blocked the view of the guard towers. I arrived at this place and stopped. I looked into the woods and held my breath, listening for any sound at all, anything that would catch my attention. After I couldn't hold my breath anymore, I exhaled with a loud push of air. I carefully checked around me. My heart started to thump harder, and I could feel my adrenaline pick up. I knew what I wanted to do. I slowly lifted a foot to take a step, and that's when I heard a voice. "Can you help me?" It was a young girl's voice. I stepped back quickly and looked around me, thinking one of the children had snuck out. I didn't see anyone around me, so I looked back into the woods. Nothing. I turned to go back home when she called out again. "Please help me, I'm stuck, and the devil is going to get me," she whispered. I could hear the tremble in her voice, but I still couldn't see her. It had to be a trick. I went to turn, but as I did, a bush moved. I froze, and that's when I saw the girl pushing her way through a thick bush. She had scratches on her face and looked to have been crying. I came in here because my mommy said to follow her, but I tripped on this bush and now I'm stuck," she explained, breaking into tears and sniffling. I didn't feel scared anymore. Nothing about this felt like a trick. I'd watched a young girl disappear into these woods before, and I couldn't let it happen again. I cautiously took a step into the woods. I tensed up and waited. Nothing. No wave of fear or regret. No cries out from the devil with, "Now I gotcha." Nothing. Just the wind through the trees, and a small girl crying as she struggled with the bush. I took another step. "Where's my mommy?" she asked, pulling at the branch that had wrapped around her leg. I don't know," I replied. "I'm going to get you out of here." I felt the cold air for the first time. My face got hot, and I could see my breath in front of me. I felt nervous all of a sudden, scared because I knew every face in this community, and as I took that third step towards this crying child, I realized that I had never seen this girl before. I stopped in my tracks and looked at the girl. Please help me," she cried softly. "No, this is a trick," I said more to myself. The wind was picking up and some rain had started to fall. It made little pops as it hit the leaves on the ground around me. The trees had begun to sway. I watched this girl rub the rainwater from her face, but all she managed to do was smear the dirt and blood from her scratches. I retreated another step. The girl began to pull at the bush, trying desperately to break the branches. She tried to crawl away, but her lower half was hidden by the bush. I had no idea how she could become so stuck. It was all too obvious now. I backed out the rest of the way, avoiding looking at the devil in disguise. I turned and heard it. Branches cracking and leaves crunching quickly towards me. It was running at me. I leapt fully out of the woods and landed on the ground safely on the path. I slid a little as the dirt path had gotten wet with the rain, and I looked up, into the woods. There was another figure there. A man was walking quickly to the girl. He stopped when he was beside her and knelt down. I watched him begin to untangle the branches at her feet. She was rubbing the tears from her cheek. He looked up at me and smiled. His eyes flashed red. It was him. He was the devil. I looked down at the little girl as he finished untangling her entirely. He helped her up and took her by the hand. I took a step closer. The tips of my shoes just at the tree line. He looked at me again. "That's twice," he said coldly. No, wait," I cried out. His smile penetrated the night and his eyes seemed to glow like the eyes of an animal caught in headlights. The little girl spoke to him. "Do you know where my mommy is?" she asked. "Yeah, and I'm going to take you to her," he said. He picked her up and held her to his chest and turned back to me and started walking into the forest. I could see the little girl's face on his shoulder. I stepped back away from the tree line and heard a scream from the street. I turned and ran to the front of the building, where I peeked around the corner and could see an unfamiliar young woman in night clothes calling out. Annie, she cried. My friend David, shirtless, came rushing out of his house. "Lindsay, stop. They'll hear you. They'll know I snuck you in. We'll find her." My heart dropped. I fell against the wall and I looked back towards the woods, towards the devil that had taken the girl, to the place where I had broken the rules. I stepped into the woods. I spoke to the devil, and I watched him take that girl away. Son of a... I couldn't even get the words out before I slid across the ground, rolling in an attempt to keep my face and head from hitting the ground. The impact jarred my neck, making me feel dizzy as spots danced before my eyes. My dog's leash flew from my hand as my glasses flew from my face. In a desperate attempt to make sure I didn't go over the 10-foot drop that I had fallen toward, I grabbed at roots and grass, managing to keep myself upright, half my body over the edge and looking down at rocks and tree roots. Worse yet, there was a filthy creek that had flooded from the recent rain. My dog, Bumper, had started to pull on me during our nightly walk, probably seeing a squirrel or a rabbit and deciding to give chase. I used to be able to pull him back to my side until 3 months of growth and endless puppy energy came crashing into my dog's body. Once I was sure I wasn't going to fall, I managed to find my footing, squinting at the blurs of green and brown around me. I called for him a few times more, even whistling. I heard a yelp, followed by a whine. My heart was a battering ram against my chest as I called a few more times, running toward the direction of the noises, further up the creek and drop. Then, I saw a gray and brown blur as he came rushing towards me. The lack of noise startled me. Bumper's collar had multiple tags, constantly jingling when he walked. This little run hadn't been the first time I had to look for him in the dark. Not so bad in the summer. A pain in the ass in the dead of winter. His tail was blurrier, as he wagged it back and forth, looking up at me. I looked for his leash, frowning when I saw that it wasn't around his neck anymore. Asshole, I snapped at him. Before groping around for my glasses, he said nothing, just sat next to me and wagged his long tail, panting heavily. The run must have taken a lot out of him. At least that meant I would get a good night's rest without him moving around too much. Even with the full moon glaring through the canopy above, there wasn't enough light for me to see my glasses, which were black, nice going past me. Not even enough to catch a glint of light in the lenses. After a few moments of shining around my cell phone's flashlight, I shook my head. If they had gone over the drop, there was no way I would find them in the dark. I'd have to come back in the morning and hope I hadn't broken them or lost them for good. Bumper stayed by my side as I held my phone screen up to my nose, quickly ordering a new pair of glasses online. They say hindsight is 20/20. I should have seen something like this coming. The nearsighted and short-sighted jokes were endless with me. When we got to my old apartment, I noticed Bumper had stayed at the bottom of the steps, staring up at the door frames with a quizzical look. His head was tilting side to side, his tail no longer wagging, just staying between his legs. Come on. I reached down and grabbed him by the scruff of his neck. His fur pushed against my tore-open skin, making me wince. I pulled him up a couple of steps before I let go of him and looked at my hand. Seeing it was covered with dirt, I shot him a dirty look. I'd scraped my palms when I fell, so I had reopened the wounds when I grabbed him, and my hands smeared with blood. He rolled around in the dirt, too. My hand shook with anger as I inhaled sharply. I was in no mood to give him a bath that night. He also reeked now that I was close enough to smell him. God, what had he chased after? A skunk and a pig wrestling in a pile of corpses? So I went inside, waiting for him to follow me. He did so reluctantly, giving my hands a rather vigorous, apologetic lick when he did so. I winced as his teeth scraped against the wound. Once he was inside, I shut and locked the door, taking care to turn the lock twice and check it against the chain. I kept up my phone, trying to do a quick reorder of what the tumble had cost me, and to make sure I had spares if something like this would happen again. A couple more clicks, and I had ordered him a new collar, leash, and tags. After quickly cleaning myself up in the bathroom, I stared at my reflection for a few moments. The fall hadn't banged me up too bad, just a few scrapes and cuts that would take a week or two to heal. After washing my face and a quick shower, I went back to my bedroom just in time to see Bumper go under the bed. I hoped I hadn't scared him by yelling. I peered under the bed, the shadow making it impossible to see him under it. "You want to snuggle with Mama tonight?" No answer. I made a few kissing noises and snapped my fingers as I beckoned to him. Guilt formed a pit in my stomach. Maybe I had scared him with my yelling. I threw myself onto the bed and pulled the blankets up to my chin, quickly falling asleep after selecting some music to sleep to. I slept fitfully, worry for Bumper and my lost glasses weighing on my mind. What if they had broken when they fell? What if some creep had seen me feeling around for them and thought I was easy prey? What if I hadn't been able to find Bumper and he'd gotten hurt? What if I'd yelled at him too harshly and he wouldn't want to take that trail anymore? What if he'd gotten a disease from whatever he'd chased? The next morning came too quickly. I had to fight to escape the entanglement of blankets that I'd cocooned myself in. I was dressed for the morning walk, finding some old rope to use as a leash. I shook my keys loudly, expecting Bumper to come running out, nearly knocking me over as he managed to hit the backs of my knees. Silence greeted me. Bumper? I walked back into my bedroom. Kneeling on the ground, I looked under my bed. Unable to see in the darkness underneath, I could see the black silhouette of my dog, his tail thumping loudly against the wall and bed frame. He began to pant heavily again, but stayed put where he was. Come on. I patted the ground a few times, trying to coax him out. He stayed where he was, tail thumping loudly and panting. When I tried to reach in and pull him out, he let out a growl that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I quickly retracted my arm. Groaning, I pushed myself back up, walking towards the door. I even tried fake leaving, expecting him to come bolting out when he realized I had shut the door. Nothing. Fine. If you pee on the floor, you're dead, I joked as I left the apartment. I had to find my glasses. There was no way I would be able to get to work without them. I followed the route Bumper and I had been using for the past 6 months. I was honestly surprised my feet hadn't made their own trail. As I walked, I was careful to tread lightly today, stopping to squint in the grass in the hopes my glasses would be there. Finally, I managed to find them. They hadn't gone over the drop at all. They were resting in the grass. A few scratches, but otherwise fine. When I put them back on, I felt relief wash over me. As I looked around, I smiled. Then, I felt the guilt of all the times I had snapped at Bumper come washing over me. I'd have to get him a few extra treats to say sorry. I was about to leave when I saw the bright red flash of fabric, moving back and forth in the creek. Pausing, I ventured down the drop and walked over to it. Recognizing Bumper's leash, I reached into the filthy water, pulling it out. It resisted. I tugged hard, thinking it was snagged under a rock or on a tree branch. I saw it was still hooked around something. The familiar jingling of tags made me pause. Had I managed to find what I'd lost yesterday? I was almost giddy as I pulled the leash towards me. There was a wet slap as something hit one of the rocks on the bank of the creek. I paused, staring at it for a few seconds as my brain tried to piece together what the hell I was looking at. It was pink and scabbed, with ears and a tail. I saw a few tufts of gray and brown fur that made me fall back hard against a rock. The tags around its neck read Bumper. I live in a sad tourist hotspot called Death Store by the locals. Growing up, you start to become desensitized by the weird things that happen here. But I'll get to that later. The county that I live in recently was featured as the best vacation spot in 2019 for some magazine I don't remember that my boss told me. It's true, my hometown gets as many as 2 million visitors that its sad population of 1,000 something barely covers the minimum amount of workers needed to maintain its popularity. As a kid, I had a job to do before I could even process it, but that's just how it works. We maintain this lifestyle until we become the old people who retire and decide to succumb to God's siren call that is death in this shitty wasteland. Don't get me wrong, this place is pretty great, if you can drink and enjoy your 500th sunset in a row. But for bored high schoolers like me, it gets old pretty quick, especially when everyone leaves in the fall and you are left with nothing to do and no one to talk to. That leads me to the start of my story. Being a kid in high school is hard, especially when you're the only girl in a set of triplets. I'll spare you the details, but I decided to stray away from my usual cleaning of hotel rooms for my aunt and look for a different job to get away from my life. That's what led me to my current job, an outdoor staff at my local bike store. I had seen commercials of the place at the local outdoor theater, and it was only a 5-minute walk from my house. 3 minutes are for the walk down my driveway. I'd met the owners at a job fair in my school, and after an interview, was hired. Many weird things have happened at the shop, but for the sake of the story, I'll only explain some of the things in the woods. My job consisted of setting people up on the right size bikes, connecting burly carts, and attaching these damn things called tag-alongs that are a pain in the ass to use. I usually had 2 other outdoor staff with me, and we like to hide away in the bike garage and goof off. Now, being a relatively small young girl going into my sophomore year in high school, it didn't seem like I would be a good fit for the job, but I loved it. I'd always been an active kid, and being around my brothers my whole life gave me an advantage while working around my mostly male coworkers. One worker in particular that I was close to, I'll call him E, had recently got accepted to a college my cousins went to. So we would talk to each other about that and other things. I had met E during school, the play, and sports, but never really talked to him. Just a friendly hello or occasional question. Now the thing to remember about E is that he is more than a foot taller than me. He's 6'8", kind of a skinny kid, with a messy head of blonde hair to top it off. I once walked into the garage when the lights were off and almost shit myself when I saw him in the doorframe. Despite his stature though, this kid can run. I sometimes work at a wood yard in the park after work, and he ran there to say hi. It was almost 4 miles, and in less than half an hour after his shift. Our athletic abilities and need for competition is I guess what led to the best. E had biked the whole bike route in 35 minutes. Most of our customers take around an hour and a half or 2 hours to finish the trails. Considering that it's a 10-mile loop, my need to be the best took over, and I spent the whole summer trying to beat his record. Long story short, it was a tie, but it did lead to my eventual love of biking. The trails that we advertise to bikers are usually a type of crushed limestone, and run either along the side of a cliff near a road or by the shore. I usually take some back roads before entering the park, but weird things always happen in or around the park. When I would bike in the summer, it was always small things. A black squirrel almost running into your bike, a chewed up snake in the path, deer with weird marks on their body. The most unsettling would be the vanishing footprints. When it would rain, the trails would become mush, and you would be able to make indents and footprints easily. Sometimes, after a big rainstorm, you could see these random footprints that would start out of nowhere and end the same way. I try to convince myself that they probably just got caught in the rain, and that's why they just start. But it doesn't explain why they end suddenly, or why I saw them at the beginning of the loop when for sure I didn't see them when I entered. Most of the time I didn't think anything about it, because there were always people nearby. In the summer, the trails were never empty. That was until the fall came, and all shit went loose. At first it was the cats. On the side roads by the park one day biking, I could see a lump on the side of the road with flies swarming around it. Roadkill wasn't unusual, but a huge chunk of the cat was missing. It looked like something huge must have taken a bite of it, but it wasn't clean. Most animal bites have some level of cleanliness due to coyotes or whatever predators having sharp teeth, but no. This thing, or whatever it was, seemed to have a hard time chewing through. You could see multiple bite marks, like it kept biting down till it came off. As unsettling as this was already, I wish I could say that was the last time I saw them. Out of all the weird things biking though, the smiling people are what made me quit. They come in different forms I've noticed. The first time was a tourist looking for directions in the woods, but by far the scariest encounter was by the graveyard. It was around early October when it had just started to get dark around 5 o'clock. I had wanted to get in one last bike ride before it would be crowded again for Halloween, and because it was my last day of work for the season. As tribute to the bike shop, I was going to bike the trails again. Even E had come back from college for the weekend to celebrate the end of the season. My normal trail brought me back to the local graveyard. I usually took this route because it was faster, and because it had a hill going up that I liked to challenge myself with. I was never really bothered by the graveyard, as both my grandparents and other relatives were buried there. Even some of E's relatives were buried there, as he once told me that he goes to visit them on his runs. It was getting darker, so I decided to turn on my bike light, but it was still light enough that I could see vague figures and shapes. Most people like to put these solar-powered little lights by their family's graves, and I was looking through the rows to see if I could spot the one I had put on my grandma. I was still in the road looking over when around 50 feet away, I could see a tall, skinny figure standing at the end of the row staring into the tree line. From where I was, it kind of looked like E. I mean, the height was about right, maybe a little bit taller, but who else could it be? I knew most of the locals, and none of them looked like that, so I kind of just assumed maybe he was here to visit a gravesite. Mistake number 1. Hey E, what are you doing here? I thought you had to go back. Mistake number 2. It was like something clicked in my mind as I said those words. I was broken out of some sort of trance, whatever those fuckers are. For some reason, they always seem familiar. It's like they want you to talk to them, acknowledge them, invite them. I didn't even realize how ridiculous I was being until it was too late. Why the hell would E be out here this late in the first place? He sometimes visits his relatives, but why wouldn't he come with family? Especially if it was a big enough deal that he had to stay back from returning to college. Where was his car? I knew personally that he hated to run at night. It was like I was numb to all the warning signs until I had opened my mouth. Then, it all came rushing back with a new sense of fear. I'd always been the one to not get scared easily. I would smile at the jump scares in horror movies, but the amount of sheer panic I felt as that thing turned around could kill a man. If my mind was fuzzy before, it had now become hyper-focused at what was happening before me. It still haunts me to this day. From what I could make out in the dark, it had an exaggerated grin, stretching so wide it looked painful. Its mouth looked almost fake, like one of those photos dentists showed their clients on pamphlets. But instead of a mouthful of healthy teeth, its teeth were yellow and rotting. Its eyes were glossed over, like the kind that only appear when a body has been dead for a while. You could see them reflecting in the light of my bike light, but they never blinked. They stared straight forward at me. I don't know how to describe these things. Sometimes they look like normal people, but once you talk to them, it's like they lose the facade. You start to notice the flaws in their disguise. I started to notice that whatever was in front of me was definitely not human. Hey E. At this point I was so scared I didn't even think about running away. Whatever this thing is, just copied what I had said. It didn't even say it in its own way. It copied my voice. I could smell the stench of its breath as it repeated that phrase over and over, like it was mocking me. Its breath was so horrid it caused tears to form in my eyes. I could taste the bile at the back of my throat, but I forced it down and kept staring back, afraid of what might happen if I looked away. Its breath smelled like death. Even from a distance I could smell the putrid stench of rotten meat. I can still taste the metallic aftertaste it left in your mouth. Nonetheless, I stared it down. It felt as though I was trapped in place, petrified with fear. Finally it stopped yelling. Instead, it took a step toward me. In that single step, it moved around 10 feet. I think it moving broke some kind of spell in me, because in an instant, I started pedaling away as fast as I could. I think my survival instincts took over as I peeled my gaze to the trail and pedaled away. But I was still far away from the park reeds, and more than a mile away from the main road. The hill on the way out of the cemetery didn't help. Once I got to the top, I finally turned around, still pedaling to see if it was following me. I shit you not. I turn around, and this thing is fucking sprinting at me. I could see its arms moving back and forth as it moved at an impossible pace. If I hadn't been on a bike, I would have been caught by then. I don't want to think about what would have happened then. Seeing this thing sprint at me made me go into overdrive. I don't ever think I've biked that fast in my life. Just as I went down the hill that led to the park road, I saw a car headed for me. I didn't even have time to react as my boss pulled up by me and shoved me in the car. At this point, I didn't even care that my bike was still in the middle of the road, as we turned around and booked it. Through the window I could see the thing standing at the top of the hill I had come down, still smiling. On the drive back, I didn't even care how my bosses knew to come get me, or what that thing was. They told me that they would go get my bike for me in the morning, and that I should never bike alone again. And when my bike was parked in front of my house the next day, I didn't question it. Sometimes I feel like it's better to not know. I'm still recovering from the whole ordeal, but one thing is for sure. Do not go biking alone at night. It was a wrong number that started it, the telephone ringing 3 times in the dead of night, and the voice on the other end asking for someone that hadn't lived here for a decade. The voice was male over the phone, dark, sinister. I hung up after saying that the person he was asking for was gone before going back to bed. Thunder nearly shatters the windows of my room, and I jump. The storm is going to be fierce. I crawl into my sheets and turn off the lamp. Lightning flashes outside, followed almost immediately by loud claps of thunder, and the pitter-patter of rain. I look out the window to watch the rain. Another lightning strike, and I have to jump up and out of bed because it reveals a figure not too far from my window. I can't make out a face because the lightning is gone. I quickly climb on top of my bookshelf before the next strike. I don't want the figure knowing where I am. A few seconds later, the lightning reveals the figure again, but this time, the figure is almost pressed against the glass, looking in. His face seems to be two different colors. I freeze on top of the bookshelf and watch the figure. Through flashes of lightning, I notice the figure looking throughout the room, as if looking for something or someone. I notice him looking away, but I think the lightning fades before it fully sees me. Well, in darkness, I slip off the bookshelf and hide behind it. Lightning flashes again and I see the shadow of the figure on the wall, its arms raised. I shudder but stay hidden. Once the lightning faded, I run out of my room. I ran to the phone. With fear in my racing heart, I dial 911 and wait. A female voice answers the phone. 911, what's your emergency? I shudder, trying to answer, with panic in my voice. There's a figure outside my house. Sir, take a deep breath and tell me your location. I take a very deep breath and breathe out before responding. I am at 1956 East Winston Way. I sense a pause as if in shock before she responds. We'll have an officer there in 5 minutes. Thank you. I'm confused. I've had people pause like that before when I've given them my address or had people over. Is there something wrong with this house? What has happened here? Can you give us the description of the figure you saw and where you saw that figure? I start giving her the description, but the next lightning strikes again and I see a shadow on the wall. My head spins to the window and I see the figure with its arms on the window, as if it could crawl through it. I stammer on the phone before I drop it and shout, "Get away from me!" The figure stops and seems to think things over before pounding on the glass with its fist. I run to the kitchen and obtain knives from the drawer. Not too long after, I hear the shatter of glass. I look up, shaking. I force myself to take deep breaths and prepare the knives I've gathered. I wait, but nothing comes through the door. Carefully, I walk to the other room. As I turn the corner, the figure dives at me. I manage to leap back and throw a knife at the figure. Of course it goes wild, but the figure is more cautious now. I scamper to my feet and prepare another knife while keeping my eyes on the figure. This close, I can tell that the figure is shaped like a man, but is wearing a white mask with black dots or a black mask with white dots, a fedora, and a long brown trench coat. This man gets up slowly. I can't tell how the figure can see through the mask in this light, but I put it out of my mind. He doesn't move, but seems to be waiting for something. I realize that he's waiting for a moment after the lightning strikes, and I sense more than see something coming at me. I kick my feet out and fall to the ground, while launching the knife at the man in the mask. Something hits the wall where my head was, but I don't care. A heavy grunt follows the thuds, and I hope that my knife struck home. I roll and get to my feet, ready to face him. The man is on the ground and unmoving. I don't dare move closer, in case he's trying to fool me. The lightning strikes and this time, I'm ready for him. He launches to his feet, but my knife is already on its way. He collapses and this time, I slowly walk to him. He almost looks dead, but the next lightning strike proves that he's still alive, but he doesn't attack me. What he does surprises me. He flies out the window, into the storm, and disappears. A few minutes later there's a knock on my door followed by, "Police, we got a call about a man outside a window." I hide a knife up my sleeve just in case it's the man in the mask. I look through the peephole and see an officer in uniform, so I throw the knife away and open the door. The officer looks at me and asks, "Were you the one who called?" "Yes, sir. Come in. I think you need to call someone about the broken window." He opens in surprise as he enters. "Did you fight? Are you hurt?" "No, sir. I'm not hurt, but the man has at least 2 knife wounds." He pulls out a notepad as I talk. "Man? Did you see his face?" "No. He was wearing a mask over his face with black and white splotches, a black fedora, and a brown trench coat. It is a man because I heard him grunt in pain, and I didn't make out any feminine bits. As I talk, I led him to the broken window, then where I fought the figure. He doesn't touch anything but calls on his radio for backup and CSI. What seems like hours later, I am finally allowed to go to sleep, but not at home. That place is surrounded by officers and a CSI team. What I was able to find out from people that were willing to tell me is this. The house I bought used to belong to a man named East Winston Way, born in 1956. He built this house with his bare hands, with the money from being a private security guard. Apparently that job creates as much enemies as it makes money. East had many enemies because he was paid to protect people who also had enemies and had to kill several. Ever since he was murdered in that house, in the middle of a storm, by a man with the exact same description I gave, that house has been a source of mischief for a long while. Everybody that has lived there has reported a man in a black and white mask, following them or watching them. But it was only during a storm with lightning. I think about this as I walk. I don't notice the rain, but as soon as lightning strikes, my hairs rise on the back of my neck, and some instinct makes me drop to the ground. Something hits the tree with a thick thud, right where my chest was. I quickly look at the thing in the tree and realize that it's my knife. I twirl my head around and see the figure standing there, but this time his coat isn't brown, but darker in some spots. He's bleeding. I stand and face him. I don't want to fight you. I have no quarrel with you, so just leave. The man says nothing and lightning strikes. He moves fast towards me. I have time to leap sideways right before he hits me. He connects with the tree and seems momentarily stunned. I pull the knife out of the tree and push it into the man's back. Surprisingly, the man still stands and comes at me with my other knife I threw at him. I dodge left, right, down, but fall because I had dodged a bit too much. He buries the knife in my shoulder, and I yell in pain and anger before pulling it out, pulling the man's leg out under him. He comes crashing down on his back. I roll on top of him and pin him to the ground before punching his masked face over and over like a punching bag, before bringing the knife down right next to his face, which causes the man to flinch. I punch his jaw and he stops moving. While breathing heavily, I get to my feet and call the police. I tell them my location and stand over the body. Soon, I start swaying from blood loss. As soon as a cop car appears down the street, something happens that I would never believe would have happened unless I was right there. As soon as the cop car appears down the street, lightning flashes from the sky and strikes the man on the ground. After a second, only the mask, hat, cloak, and rain boots are left, burning. I stomp out the flames before falling to the ground before my vision darkens. It grew quiet as the evening hours dwelled on. With the window slightly open, a cool breeze trickled through and caused the hairs on my arm to stand still. The cool air only made the urge to pull the covers over my head more appetizing. In the background, I could hear a random YouTube video softly playing. I had no concerns about what was playing as to the fact that I usually just play a random playlist of my favorite YouTubers, so I can fall asleep with some noise. You see, I'm an extremely light sleeper. I'll wake up to any noise, at least with the TV at a steady volume. I feel like it tricks myself into sleeping through noises, unless of course it was loud. I flipped over so my back was facing the TV, and all I can see is the various flashes of light hit the back wall. I stared at my dented, damaged, marked up wall as I tried to relax my body. My eyes briefly shut, my mind was racing, almost feeling as if I was swimming in my own electrifying thoughts. Damn anxiety. A pressure developed behind my eyes, causing myself to open them out of reflex. So annoying. I thought to myself, feeling slightly clearer minded now that my eyes were open. I sighed and wiggled around in bed, readjusting myself under my weighted blanket. I shut my eyes, determined to fall asleep. A strange sensation spread across my cheeks and nose, like a tingling feeling almost too obnoxious to ignore. It only grew in intensity until my entire head felt as though I was experiencing a head rush, like riding a drop tower at an amusement park. The pressure behind my eyes reappeared, and I fought the urge to open them. Suddenly, and surprisingly, I felt this pulling sensation out of nowhere. None of my body parts felt like they were being tugged on. It's more of a generalized sense of my entire body moving against its will. I felt so confused and lost, disoriented by the strange feelings happening around me. My head finally cleared enough to focus on something rather odd. I saw myself laying there. My back was facing me. In a sea of darkness, I could only see myself lying there as if nothing was going on. My gaze was fixated on my body that was growing further and further away. I tried to reach out, but my arms did not move. I had no words, no voice. In all honesty, I did not even think to speak out loud. I continued to stare at my body lying as I was gradually pulled away. This head rush began to become more overwhelming than it already was previously. I could not stand to keep my eyes shut any longer. In an instant, my eyes fluttered open, and I stared at my dented bedroom wall. What the hell? I exclaimed, frustrated that I could not sleep. My mind was still racing, and just would not shut off. Out of sheer ignorance, I shut my eyes once more. Immediately I was greeted with the familiar sight of my undisturbed body, but this time I was much farther away. The pulling sensation became more aggressive. I was virtually paralyzed, a passive victim watching as this thing pulls me away. What could I do? I had no urge to scream or fight back, and even if I did, could I? Even the urge to wake up became a lesser thought as my body grew further in distance. The pressure and pain behind my eyes began to engross my entire head. Intensifying with each throb, it became disorienting, intoxicating even. Opening my eyes was no longer something I could control. I silently watched my body get further away, growing smaller. What's happening? Somehow, in some way, that thought was able to claw its way through the swarming, uncontrolled rubble my brain was currently experiencing. Before I could think anymore, my pain and disorganized thoughts abruptly stopped. I could finally think straight. Before I had time to take everything in, I looked back at my fading body. My body looked so small, yet I did not feel anything anymore. No pain, no strange pulling, no racy thoughts. Did I finally drift off to sleep? A deep sense of dread filled my core. No, I'm not asleep. I'm not awake either. I could not see my body anymore. My eyes widened. The darkness seemed to have a pulse, vibrating to a hidden, ominous hum. I stared into the pitch black abyss, unsure of what I was expecting to see. Without any hesitation, I felt my body shift around, differently than the pulling sensation. A low, distorted growl echoed through the darkness. With my eyes practically bulging out, I scanned around the darkness without moving my head, inspecting my disorienting surroundings. In an instant, something shifted in the darkness, but blended almost seemingly with the varying shades of black. It moved closer to me, sporadically moving in an inhuman way. My body was frozen with fear. The growl grew louder and more sinister. "Don't fall asleep," it spoke, almost mocking me. Without any effort, that thing was directly in front of me, inches away from my face. Suddenly, it opened its eyes. The eyes were lifeless yet produced such fear in my soul. "I said don't fall asleep," it screeched as it engulfed my face. I screamed in horror, attempting to bring my hands to my face. My eyes shot open while my hands were grabbing my face. My horrific, painful scream filled my room. I sprang to a sitting position, my blankets balled around my lap. With tears welling up in my eyes, I glanced around my room. I saw my dented, marked up wall. I turned my head the opposite way to see the same YouTube video playing. I grabbed my chest, taking deep breaths to calm down. Did I fall asleep? It felt just like I shut my eyes. I stared down at my hands, tears now streaming down my face. I'm now awake at least. I sighed, mentally exhausted. Unannounced, a sharp, deep throb suddenly appeared behind my left eye, shortly followed by my right eye. I grabbed my face in pain. Something eerily familiar echoed through my room. "Don't fall asleep,"